Welcome back. I am excited to talk about another topic with you today. We are going to get into the topic of pricing. So we have already spent some time in past videos on our first P, product. In that section, in that video, we covered products and brand management, the product life cycle, different types of branding, and a variety of other product related concepts. So today we're going to move into the second P, which is pricing. And then in future videos, we're going to talk about the last two P's, which are place or distribution and promotion. So those will round out our marketing mix of videos for this semester. Okay, so let's think about pricing for a few minutes. When we think about our pricing strategy, we have a few things we want to remember. Okay, so we're going to talk about why pricing is important, how we set objectives for pricing. We're going to talk about the factors that influence pricing. We're going to talk about several of the key pricing strategies that are commonly used by companies. We're going to talk a little bit about internet pricing because it is somewhat unique. And finally, we're going to talk about other aspects of pricing, like what kinds of psychological impacts are there? How does pricing impact our psychology and vice versa? Are there legal issues related to pricing? And then in that same vein, what are some ethical issues that are related to pricing? So let's get into it. So price. We define price as the assignment of value or the amount the consumer must exchange to receive the offering or the product or the service. This can include money, goods. It can include votes. We're coming up on election season. Anything else that has value to the other party. This could be, anything that has value going back to bartering. We also have to consider opportunity costs. Okay, so what other things could we utilize that resource for? The money, the chickens, the favors or votes or whatever. Okay. When we think about price planning, we go through a process that's really similar to a lot of the other processes in marketing. We're going to start with some objectives. Then we're going to analyze what's going on. We're going to figure out a pricing strategy, and then we're going to implement it. So more specifically, we want to figure out what are our objectives. Generally speaking, our objective for most corporations, most companies, is profit. However, we might want to, in certain seasons, there might be differences in our pricing and our objectives. It may be that we are really focused on growing our overall revenue, and then we're going to focus on costs later, so trying to increase profit at a later point. We want to increase those sales now, and maybe that we want to focus on market share. And so if we're trying to capture more of the customers than the competitor, right, we might utilize different pricing strategies, and that may make a difference in the pricing strategies that we choose. If we are focused on our competitors and we are just reacting to something a competitor has done, that will impact what strategies we use. Customer satisfaction can be an objective for pricing, as well as image enhancement. Does our pricing impact what consumers think about us? Okay, so that's the first step. What is our actual objective? What are we truly trying to accomplish? The next is going to be to estimate demand. So here we want to try to consider there are going to be shifts in demand. This could be based on the economy and what's going on in the economy overall. It could be based on the specifics to our industry, and it could be seasonal. So for example, when we look at some industries, even if the economy is doing poorly, if we go into a recession, there are still going to be industries and companies within those industries that still perform well. And so their pricing may be different than companies or industries that do not perform as well. One example might be toilet paper. For example, when toilet paper, the economy is poor, when we're in a recession, people still buy toilet paper, right? Obviously, they buy toilet paper still. What tends to happen is that there may be a shift in the brand of toilet paper that is purchased, right? So consumers will tend to shift or switch down from a more premium brand to a more cost or value brand. And so a real world example is that prior to 2008, AngelSoft, which was one of the most sold, the 4-pack of AngelSoft toilet paper is one of the most sold of all the products in Walmarts across the country. And it's when the economy was doing well, the company said, Georgia Pacific, that owns AngelSoft, said, okay, this is an opportunity for us to increase our margins by gradually increasing our prices. So they didn't say tomorrow we're going to charge twice as much. They said over time, over the course of 6 months to a year, we're going to increase our prices. Our costs we expect to stay the same, but if we can increase our prices and therefore increase the margins and increase our profit on each of those sold. Now, in 2008, the recession hit, and we call it the Great Recession, and it was a big deal. And what happened was a lot of consumers switched from brands like Sherman or Quilted Northern to AngelSoft because it was perceived as a value brand, right? It's still less expensive than those premium brands. And so AngelSoft and Georgia Pacific, they were actually able to maintain their price with the higher margins incorporated because consumers switched down. They didn't actually have to adjust their prices due to the recession like a lot of companies had to. They were able to really maintain that because they had gradually increased it when times were good. The next thing we want to consider is price elasticity of demand. Okay, so this is going to be thinking about how much will demand change if we increase or decrease the price. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Next, we're going to think about costs. What are the costs that we know have to be put in order to make the product? Those are our variable costs. And then what are our fixed costs? What are things that are not going to change no matter how many packs of toilet paper we produce? There are going to be some costs that are going to stay the same. We can utilize that information to conduct a break-even analysis. And this is going to tell us how many widgets or how many 4 packs of toilet paper do we have to sell in order to make $0 in order to just cover all of our costs for that period of time. And that can help us understand where we should set our price. Right? Does it make sense to sell that many units in that time period, or if we change our price, will that impact change it to make it more reasonable? Next, we're going to look at the pricing environment. This is going to be looking at what all is going on around us. What are our competitors doing? Is our price within the range of our competitors? Is it an outlier? If it's way too high or way too low, that's going to cause concern for consumers, right? We already talked a little bit about the economy and in terms of how that may impact demand. Government regulation can be a big one. Government regulation almost always causes increases in prices, whether that is increasing the minimum wage or increasing the type of environmental regulation where companies would have to purchase additional equipment in order to comply with certain rules, or let's say a baker, someone who wants to start a bakery wants to, start selling at the farmer's market or at a grocery store. Right? According to government laws, there are certain things that baker has to do. Like at a certain point, that baker can no longer cook in their own home, bake those things in their own home. They are required to utilize a commercial space, a commercial baking space, a commercial kitchen in order to produce those products. Now you can imagine if you were just baking out of your home and now all of a sudden you have to rent space or rent time at a commercial kitchen or purchase a commercial kitchen or something, that's going to drive up your costs. And therefore, most of the time as companies, we tend to pass along those costs to our consumers. So the increase in cost for us as a firm ends up being an increased cost to the consumer. in order to maintain our margins and be able to pay all of our costs. All right, so let's talk about price elasticity. When we think about understanding demand, one of the things we want to consider is price elasticity. This is going to refer to how much will demand change based on whether the price goes up or down. So for example, a inelastic product, an example of that would be gas. People still have to drive to work, whether or not gas prices are $4 a gallon or they're $2 a gallon. You may see some slight changes in behavior. If a consumer has 2 cars available, they might choose to drive the car that gets better gas mileage. But a lot of consumers don't have the choice. And so at least in the short term, we see that regardless of the price going up or down, for something like gasoline or other staple products like milk, other commodities, we really don't see a lot of demand changes whether or not the price goes up or down. Now, I will note that in the long term, we actually do see some changes, but it is more of a long-term thing. So for example, when prices of gas go up and they're sustained at a high price for months or even years, consumers tend to not really switch their behavior in terms of their actual driving behavior, how much they drive or how frequently they go to the gas station. But we see that smaller cars, hybrids, and electric vehicle sales tend to go up. And the sales of things like big trucks and SUVs tend to go down when we have those sustained high prices. And then we see the opposite effect when prices go back down and are sustained at a lower level for a longer period of time. We see those SUV, big truck sales go back up, and we see electric cars, hybrids, and smaller, more fuel efficient cars go back down. So it is kind of an interesting relationship where you have short-term inelasticity, you have a little bit more elasticity in the long term. But if I were to ask you, what is an example of a product with inelastic demand? Gasoline, staple products, things like milk, things that people have to buy for the most part, and things that people are going to continue to buy regardless of the price going up or down a little bit. The other one, the opposite of that is elastic prices. So this is going to be something where if you see increases, you're going to increases in prices, you might expect a pretty significant drop in demand. If you decrease your price, you will see an increase in demand. So these are going to be things that are unneeded products, right? Not necessities, not staple products, right? Not commodities. So things like you might see this with food products that are not staples, like soda. The price of soda actually has gone up pretty substantially in the past few months, actually. And so it's likely that we've seen that the demand for soda has actually dropped. It could be things like vehicles and anything else that is just clothing. Clothing is especially clothing that we don't perceive as like a value clothing. So anything that is not a commodity, not a stable product that people have to have, would tend to have price elasticity. Okay. We've talked a little bit about variable and fixed costs already. We talked about the environment, the external environment, and the different components there that impact pricing. So let's move on to pricing strategies. So we have a variety of pricing strategies. Here are kind of the top few, I would say. And so cost plus is going to, it's exactly what it sounds like. We are going to take whatever our variable costs are, and we're going to add on typically a percentage. So maybe cost plus another 30% or cost plus 50%. Okay. The next is going to be price leadership. And so we'll go back to that. Okay. Let's go here. We might use a price leadership strategy where we're really basing this on our competition. On the other flip side, we could use something like value or everyday low pricing. This is basically Walmart's strategy. It's based on customer needs. And the idea here is exactly what it sounds like. We are going to be the everyday low price. Does it mean that we have the lowest price on every single thing in the store compared to every single retailer out there? No, but it does mean that on average, we have lower prices than our competitors, right? And that we have, and then we're going to communicate that with our consumers. Okay. Okay. Let me just pause this for a second. No. Okay, so let's start here. Let's dig into these different strategies that we might use for pricing. So one or a couple of strategies we could use would be pricing based on competition. So the first one is price leadership strategy, and the second one's cost leadership strategy. And then we could use pricing based on our customer needs. So this is going to be value pricing, things like the dollar store, or everyday low pricing, like Walmart, where maybe not everything in the store is the lowest price among competitors, but on average, things are going to be the lowest price compared to competitors. When we think about pricing based on competition, going back up, cost leadership is really a strategy that only works for the market leader. This is when there's a leader in the market that has such a strong advantage, typically in terms of market share, that they are basically able to indirectly determine the price for the entire industry. Most of the time, this is because they have been able to bring their costs, why it's called cost leadership, costs down so far that they can charge a much lower price than their competitors while still making a profit. So one example would be McDonald's when they came out with the dollar menu several years ago. That was relatively new for the industry, and they pretty much forced almost all of their competitors into having something similar to a dollar menu. We've seen that change over time, but that is definitely cost leadership, where that was a strategy that McDonald's engaged in and kind of forced the other competitors into changing their prices because of McDonald's. Now, price leadership strategy, this is kind of the opposite, where we have one company that changes their prices, maybe increases their prices, and then the rest of the competitors sort of follow. We kind of see this in the airline industry, when you see, even though they have dynamic pricing, which is what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, they tend to, you don't tend to see a lot of flights that are way, way more expensive if it's the exact same route or going to the same places. And so regardless of costs, they kind of follow each other around. Um, and this can actually increase profits and margins for everyone across the board. Whereas when we have the cost leadership, that's really only benefiting one of the competitors, that typically the market leader. Then we have new product pricing. So there are three major strategies for new product pricing, most common things that we would do. First, we have skimming. This is where we come into the market with our brand new product and we charge a pretty high price for it. When we charge a high price for it, we are really indicating that it is new and it is different and it is more valuable than the other things that are available to us. If you think about technology products, these tend to have they tend to use a skimming strategy. If you think about the very first, really the precursor to cell phones, were those bag phones that people carried around, or car phones that had to plug into your car. Those were wildly expensive. Those were like $4,000 a phone. And so that was a skimming price, really indicating that this was something new and different, and really believing that people would pay for that. So thank goodness for rich people who are willing to pay $4,000 for a phone in a bag, so that now we can have the phones that we have, right? They really sort of led the way in that, if you will. Then we have penetration pricing. So this is the opposite. This is where we're coming in with a new product and we are charging a relatively low price. The goal here is market share. We tend to use penetration pricing if we expect a competitor to come into the market pretty quickly, and we want to capture as much market share as we can before they get into the market. And so we charge that lower price to capture them as much of the market as possible. Another way to look at these two kind of opposing viewpoints, I think Apple and Android kind of utilize two separate strategies. And you can see that they were both successful. So Apple came in with the iPhone with a skimming strategy, much higher price than pretty much anything else that was on the market at the time. Android came in with a penetration strategy where instead of making their own phones, they actually licensed their software to any phone company for the most part. So when Androids first came out, you get an Android for like $50. And that was, almost as good as the one that was $100. And that was about the price range when they first came out. So that was penetration pricing. And so we could see that we have two things that are competitors, and they use two totally different strategies when they enter the market, and they both were very successful and are still competing head to head. Trial pricing is our third one. This is where we would have a lower price if you purchase, within the first certain amount of time. Maybe you pre-order and you get a discount, or you get, we see this a lot with streaming. You get the first 3 months for $4.99, and then after that it goes up to $12.99, right? And so you get to try it for a lower price before you commit to that full price, or you buy it, like you would pre-order it at a discount, and so they're guaranteed those sales. Okay. All right. So those are our major strategies. We are going to, let me go back here. Those are our major pricing strategies. We are going to come back for the next video and talk about pricing online, and how online pricing and the internet has really changed the pricing landscape, as well as talking about some of the psychological, legal, and ethical factors of pricing. All right. We'll see you in a few.